Hi, Abby, can you hear me? Okay, and you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can, and we're recording, just so you know. And we have 13 attendees, 14, which is great. So if you're just joining us, welcome. We won't officially start till 2 o'clock. But because this is about learning how to teach online, you'll see that Abby and I, as co-facilitators, have some things to work out before we get started. And the kind, so I'll sort of talk through what I'm doing so you all can hear this. So I'm in Zoom webinar, which is a little bit different. So let us introduce ourselves, I guess, even though it's beforehand since we're talking, and then we'll introduce. So I'm Ray Levy, I'm Deputy Executive Director of the MAA, and I am here with?
I'm Abby Herzig, I'm the Director of Education at AMS.
We're really delighted to be here today. So we're on Zoom webinar. And this particular license has room for 100 people. If for some reason it looks like we're right at 100, I've actually, I don't know that Abby's available for all this time, but I've actually got this webinar going from 2 to 4. And I put in a shared Google Doc that if you can't get on at 2 or you get kicked out for some reason, try again at 3. So we'll sort of ask people who are in the first wave to pop out at 3, and if it seems like there's a lot more people, I can stick around for another hour and talk with people today. So what else am I doing? So I'm in Zoom webinar. If you're a participant, you can't see all the things that we can see. So I have a, if I wiggle my cursor, I get some things at the bottom. I can mute myself, unmute myself like this, unclick. I can stop my video and start it again. I can see how many participants there are. There's 17 right now. There's a button called Q&A. So I'm going to hit that button for a minute, and it says no open questions. Yesterday, this was actually a bit of a distraction because we had the chat window and the question and answer. I was going to try to actually post something, but Abby, it looks like I can't post a question, which is kind of interesting. Open. What if I do open answer? Nope. So as a panelist, it looks like I can only.
Yeah, I can't either.
So with somebody who's a participant, it looks, okay, I see Q&A. So somebody, here is a question. Thank you, Benjamin Gaines, that's great. Can you type into the question and answer? This window is a little distracting. Let's put all questions and answers in the chat.
I can do that even.
If you can do that, so Abby, you can post in the Q&A window?
I can answer.
Oh, you can answer. Oh, and Benjamin beat you to it. Nice, thank you. Okay, so we'll see how that works. We'll try to pop back down there now and then just in case we miss something. I see polls. Maybe we will on the fly try to do a poll today. I haven't done that. We didn't do that yesterday. I have a share screen, and all panelists can share screen, and any attendee can be promoted to a panelist to share their screen. What else do we have here? We have advanced sharing options. So I can say that right now I have all panelists can share, and I have who can interrupt someone else when they're sharing. That's kind of neat. Okay. I have, so there's the chat window, which is empty so far. So I can say, here's, oh, let's see. So as a panelist, I actually have to change this to be all panelists and attendees. Here's where we will put all of our Q&A. A nice thing is to please introduce yourself. So there's the chat window. So a nice thing to do is to just introduce yourself with your maybe your institution, maybe what class you are, class or classes you're planning to teach online. I really love it, how this is building community amongst institutions. It's one of the, I guess, positive things. Okay. And the important thing here is that Abby and I are not here to be the experts. We're just here to be the facilitators and conveners. So we're really going, this is informal, it's about crowdsourcing. So I'll say this again, but what we want you to do as participants is you can raise your hand. So in somewhere, so somebody type in the chat window how it is that you actually as a participant raise your hand. So I see Lauren raising her hand. So Lauren, I'm gonna hit allow you to talk. And you see when I hit allow you to talk, here comes Lauren. And Lauren, if you unmute yourself, would you be willing to tell us how you managed to raise your hand?
There's an icon on the bottom middle. It's right in the middle on the bottom screen below the video.
Okay. So is it in your same
it's right in between it's right in between the chat and the Q&A buttons in the middle.
Awesome.
Whereas mute is all the way on the left for me.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really different than the interface that I'm looking at. So that's how you raise your hand, and then I can so if I hit disable talking, she disappears again. All fun stuff. And Abby will have the ability to do that too. So if you have something to say, to contribute, you know, take a look in the chat window, see if there's anything that you may have expertise on, or that you want to add a further question to. Abby's going to pay attention to the chat and to the raising hands, and we'll get the conversation go that way.
I'd also be curious and encourage people to share, if you do have experience with online teaching, share your experience with us so others can learn from that.
Absolutely. I am going to also throw into the chat window a link to an online doc, which might be where you all got the link to the invitation, but this is a document where we are recording this this conversation, but we may or may not post this video. We may just try to curate some of the ideas from this video and throw it into the Google Doc. So holding on to that Google Doc would be great. So we've got 3 more minutes, but I'm really excited to see we have people from Cal Poly Pomona, from Clemson, from UIndy, and Assumption College, Massachusetts, Trinity College in Connecticut, Iona College in New Rochelle, Riviera University, Longwood. Jeff, where's Longwood? And Miracosta College, Southern California. Somebody doesn't see a mute button. That's interesting. Okay, let's figure that out. So somebody said, I don't see a mute button. If you wiggle your mouse or your cursor, hopefully that mute button will appear along with a whole bar of options at the bottom.
It's a little microphone icon all the way to the left. And next to it should be a video camera icon that you can use to turn off your camera or on.
So Cindy's Mac, let us know if that's working for you or if you still don't see your mute button. We'll try to problem solve. And then we've got Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh, Syracuse. Someone else says I don't see their mute button. It may just be that when you haven't wiggled your mouse, you don't see any of their toolbar, but let us know. It says mute, unmute only shows up if you have speaking privileges. Thanks, Lauren. So Lauren had the experience of being given speaking privileges. So there's the answer to that. So I just learned something. That's great. And then the other, Benjamin Gaines reminds us that, and this is really important, that if you change your chat from all panelists to all panelists and attendees, then everybody will be able to see. Brooke says she doesn't see either, no mute button. Okay, there you go. So one of the things, we have 50 attendees now, which is fantastic. One of the things we did yesterday was at some point made everyone a panelist so you could see all the fancy buttons, but we also know all heck might break loose in terms of everybody sharing and everybody talking at the same time. So we're gonna keep it slightly more controlled to start with, but then we at some point may have the fun experience of having 100 panelists, so at least all of you can see all of these particular features in case you want to see how Zoom works. And of course, Zoom isn't the only way to do online teaching. It's just the license that MAA has. All right, so it's 2 o'clock. So I'm going to restart. Welcome to everybody. I'm Ray Levy. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the MAA, and I'm joined by...
I'm Abby Herzig. I'm the Director of Education at the American Mathematical Society.
And we are very delighted today to join you to have an informal chat about teaching online. Now, Abby and I are here as your hosts, but we are not here as your experts per se. So we're really going to rely on you to both ask questions and share your experiences. So just to get started, none of you are able to just automatically pop in and talk right now, and we can't see any of you, which is actually a little sad. Like, we really enjoyed yesterday when we made everyone panelists because we could see everybody, but it's also a little bit overwhelming with everybody potentially talking at the same time. So here's what we're going to do. For a while, we're going to do all our Q&A in the chat window. So your first assignment is to find the chat window and to introduce yourselves. You want to change on the chat window to make sure it says all panelists and attendees. So when you click chat, a window should open that says Zoom webinar chat. And then there's a 2, and under 2, your choices are all panelists for some people and all panelists and attendees. And so you want it to say all panelists and attendees so everybody can see what you chat. And then please introduce yourself, say hi. And if you want, ask some questions. So we did this yesterday, and I would say there were a lot of different questions. Some of them about how to deal with testing or assessment of formative or summative assessment. So I would especially today like to hear from people who have experience with that so that we can share those experiences with each other and start thinking about creative ways to, or well tried and true and evidence-based ways to do our assessments once we're teaching online.
I'd also like to throw out, just to think about as we have this discussion, I was just reading an article online, a blog, where someone was saying, don't need to do a good job teaching online. And it was kind of a provocative title, but what she was trying to say is, it doesn't need to be perfect. Recognize as much stress as you're under from the current situation, your students are as well. They might have family responsibilities, they might be, you know, they're moving, who knows what's going on. And it doesn't need to be perfect or as demanding or rigorous as what you would normally do in class. You're just all trying to do the best you can. I'm not endorsing or not endorsing that point of view. I just thought it was an interesting talking point.
Thanks, that's great. So what we want you to do is to raise your hand so that you can actually ask a question or make a comment. And I see someone practicing raising their hand. They may not actually. So why don't everybody for a minute practice raising your hand. We won't call on you. Just everybody raise your hand. So we want to see 70 raised hands. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll through to see that you all have your hand raised. Not quite yet. This is the participation, the first participation part. So I see about 30 raised hands and about 30 not raised hands. So the way you raise a hand, Lauren was explaining to us, is that in your bottom toolbar, you should see an icon that allows you to raise the hand. And then we should see in the panelist bar that people's hands are raised. So I see a lot of hands raised, but I don't see everyone's hands raised. So I really want to see everyone's hands raised before we move on. It's pretty good. We're down to only 3 hands not raised. So this is an interesting thing you might be able to do with your students to see who is paying attention at that minute or who is multitasking. So this feature of being able to raise your hand and unraise your hand, like, who's with me? Who's not with me? Okay, now, how about everybody, so put in the chat window if anybody's having trouble raising their hands. I'm just looking to see. So someone says, I don't see the toolbar until I click on the bottom of the screen. Someone said, can I share my screen so I can show you how it looks to me? Yes. I will do that. I'm going to share my screen. Tell
But
me-
you don't have a hand to raise, so I don't know if it helps for you to.
Well, I think they might just want to see. Can you see this now? Oh, that's
That's
actually,
your Google Doc.
yeah, that's the Google Doc. That's interesting. That is not the Zoom window. So let's pull that. Yeah, it doesn't want me to do that. That's interesting. We had this issue yesterday when we were trying to share several different things. Zoom wasn't allowing us to share them from within. So it's like a Zoom within a Zoom, doesn't work very well. But I could, you know what I can do, if I want to be clever about this, is I can take a screenshot. So I'm gonna scroll down so you can see some of the hands. I'm gonna try to take a screenshot. All right. And then, yeah, you know, that's an interesting thing to try. It's not so great, but if I did hit share, since we're learning here. Yep. Okay. See if you can see this. Abby, can you see that? Does it look like you and me and some names to the right?
Yeah. Now I see the view of your screen. It's only partial though. I also want to say, if you can't raise your hand, for some reason you can't figure out how to do it, as long as you can type in the chat box, we can get hold of your questions or ideas that way.
That's great. Yep. So how about everybody unraise your hand? So let's have 0 hands raised for a minute. And I'll wait for a sec for that to happen. And after we have 0 hands raised, then we'll restart and we'll have people raise hands that actually are ready to share some experiences teaching online, ask some questions, and this will be the beginning of the informal exchange.
So I see Leah Shaw has a hand raised.
Okay,
Leah,
great.
want to share something?
Yes. All right, I'm gonna bring in Laura Watkins, because it looks like Leah may have unraised her hands. Hi, Laura. Do you want to unmute and?
Hi, Laura.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
So did you have a question or a comment or a conversation?
No, well, so as we're having this conversation and I notice people are making this transition, I think a distinction that we might want to have in the conversation is whether or not we're talking synchronous or asynchronous, because the tools and the things that you might do online will vary depending on that factor.
I think that's a really important consideration. And one of the recommendations in that article with the provocative title that I just mentioned was to perhaps avoid synchronous just because it's too hard to coordinate with everybody since people are in different places and don't have reliable internet access necessarily. That does limit some of what you can do.
So what I've just done is you should be able now to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 panelists. There's 2 different views. So if you look on the upper right-hand side, it will say it has a gallery view and a speaker view. So you can click on it and go back and forth between your gallery view and your speaker view. If you look at my little window, because I'm talking, there should be it should be highlighted around my window. And so if it's in a gallery view, it should be like a game show where you can see all of us. Welcome, Tyler. And so JASPY and Yvonne, you can turn your screens on if you want and join us in the conversation. And Diana, and also be like this if you're like, get me off, or you can chat in the chat window like, I did that by accident, but please join the conversation. And as people raise their hands, I'll have them join. And then when they're kind of done, I'll have other people join in as well. So Yvonne, did you want to make a comment or?
Yeah, I don't, I guess I wasn't sure about how the participants today differ from yesterday. And if there's a significance, I was wondering if people who were there, who could join yesterday might be able to just like summarize a few key points from yesterday that they thought were the most helpful.
I think that would be great. I would love if it could come from a participant rather than me. So if there's anybody there who was there yesterday who might be willing to share some of the ideas from yesterday, I think that's a great idea. This is that famous wait time, right?
Somebody
Okay.
posted some notes in the chat window.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to read those, Yvonne? 'Cause I think, yeah, Zoom tools to explore. These are some things we talked about yesterday. So
what's this for the video next to the microphone is a video icon? Is that part of the, what does that mean?
That's how you turn on and off your camera.
Oh, okay, got it. Was that a highlight from yesterday?
I think one of the things yesterday we were really playing around with is what are the capabilities of Zoom? So my license for Zoom is not Zoom Pro. And so one of the things we learned yesterday is that there are different grades of licenses. There are free grades for most of these softwares to limit the number of participants. When you get an upgrade, you get more particular participants, but then when you upgrade again, you also get more features. So two of the features it seems like might be very important. One is breakout rooms. And so what I realized is even though I'm using right now a version of Zoom webinar that has up to 100 participants, I do not have the breakout room feature. In order to do that, I would have to upgrade to Zoom Pro. And we did that for our section meetings. So our section meetings for the spring are thinking about going online. And so it's really important for them to have breakout rooms so that they can put people into different sessions with different kinds of presentations. And you may want that for your students as well. So one of the things that we're going to try to do in one of these chats is to have a chat that's just all about how to handle breakout rooms. In some softwares, it's easier than others. In some softwares, it's not possible ahead of time to set up those rooms with particular people in them very easily. You have to sort of drag, okay, this participant's going to be in this room, and then this participant's going to be in that room. And in some of the softwares they talked about yesterday, how you can do randomly assigned groups. So you can say, make breakout rooms, have 6 people per room, throw people in the rooms. And we were sort of, one of the things we talked about yesterday were the pros and cons of that, of students being able to choose their own groups or being able to assign groups versus the efficiency of just being able to hit a button and have those groups automatically be created because you want them just to talk about something in a smaller group.
So there are a few questions in the chat box, unless there are people who already had their hands raised. That I'll leave that to you, Ray.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to read those? Because I figure if they're in the chat box, Abby, maybe you can read them and maybe people can answer them.
The first one in the chat box is, I think this is the difference between a webinar and a meeting. Webinar attendees have fewer options. That's just a comment. Some people asked about a Zoom whiteboard.
Yes. So we also did play with the Zoom whiteboard yesterday because one of the participants had that in their version of Zoom. But again, this version of Zoom, as far as I know, does not have, I'm looking under more right now, but I do not see the whiteboard option for me. The whiteboard option, one thing we played around was the difference between using the whiteboard option and using just using a tablet with a pen with share screen and using a document cam overhead with a regular paper and pen or pencil, and the sort of personal preferences about the feeling of writing for a long time or showing notes or drawing on notes in that way. So different people had different preferences, but it does seem like there are a lot of options there for do-it-yourself versus higher tech.
Just one other tool that some of you may have access to through your universities is called VoiceThread. I've taught in VoiceThread. It's an asynchronous platform where you can interact by voice. So you're essentially recording voice or video, but it's asynchronous. The next question in the chat box is, those of us whose classes are currently teaching synchronized face-to-face, but switching to online, would a continuation of synchronized be a better starting point? Does anyone have a response?
We have 86 participants. I am thinking that one of these 86 participants has some experience.
There are a couple of raised hands.
Okay, great.
Monica,
Very good. I'm gonna,
Monica Van Dieren
all right. Monica, welcome.
and Susie Brooks.
Great, thank you.
Hi. I was just going to mention that one of the issues with going from, or with the synchronous and mandating that is that you've got equity issues that students may be out of the dorms now and they don't have the same schedules they did when they were living in the dorms, and maybe they have bad internet connection that day, that sort of thing. So it's something you want to think about when you make that decision.
I'm also concerned because a lot of my students have children. I have a lot of non-traditional students, and if the public schools close, even though they were formally available to come to my class at a set time, now that's thrown out the window. So I'm inclined to go asynchronous with my courses.
We're using Blackboard Collaborate instead of Zoom, and you have the option to record a session. And so I'm thinking of, still trying to run something synchronously, but then recording it, and then the session would be available later as a way to deal with that. And it's also come up, you have people in different time zones. So, we teach in 9 o'clock class. Are they really going to get up at 6:30 in the morning? Kind of thing. A question I had, and I don't know if it came up yesterday, and again, it might be somewhat dependent on which platform you're using, but how to be able to write on a screen. So I often will have sort of slides with an outline, and then I'll write in real time the examples. And it's been really difficult to figure out how to do that. Like I saw there was something in the chat about, have your iPad join anonymously, but then with Collaborate, you can't share a document or an application on mobile. You can only do it on the computer. And so just figuring out how to be able to write on something, sometimes when you have a whiteboard, but you have to use the mouse. So unless you have some other device that makes it like a touch screen, I don't know, just getting my head around even low-tech versions of how do you deal with the writing?
Someone in the chat box responded to that saying you can share a Google slide. That was from Suzanne Doree. I don't know what Google Slide is, so maybe she can speak to that.
Hi, I have an answer to that because I've made a lot of online videos for my classes. I've been teaching blended and online learning for a few years now. And one thing that my department bought me is a Wacom drawing tablet. So that's how I do writing on the screen. You can screen share and then use something like OneNote or Photoshop or Microsoft Paint or anything like that to do the writing on. So that's maybe not a low-tech option, but if you have a little bit of funding or disposable money, then that would be a really good option and would last you into the future.
I'm not an expert on Google Slides, having only used them with colleagues. I don't know what trouble you can get into when everyone's allowed to write and project on the screen all at once. I know there's a link to someone who has been using it that Rachel provided in the main document. I'm also a big fan of having written what I'm going to write ahead of time and then annotating it by voice. I believe that Zoom Record and Pro will transcribe. It takes a couple hours, I think, but it will create a transcription. so that if someone is later listening or you're posting it, they can see what you were saying that isn't pre-written as well.
Thanks, Sue. One of the suggestions yesterday about Zoom or one of the automatic captioning softwares is you do need to check, because sometimes it will interpret mathematical expressions it doesn't understand with words you would rather not have in the transcript. So apparently for an hour-long class, that takes about 15 minutes, they said. And what they did was they would just do the most egregious things, and then they would offer a little bit of credit for students who were the first ones to send in notice of something that was mathematically significant, but maybe that they had caught that they hadn't caught, and then they do those updates or have have some sort of updating device.
There are several questions in the chat box about how to do assessment testing and assessment in general.
All right. And everyone who's right now a panelist is welcome to speak up.
Jaspy has their hand raised, but is muted. So if you want to unmute. Now that person's hand went down.
Okay. Maybe. Sorry, I meant to have it back up.
Oh, and yeah, introduce yourself.
Me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Beth. And I just wanted to say that what I like to do sometimes is maybe very low tech, but I have PDF annotator, and then I put up a sort of a blank PDF file, and I have a bamboo ink pen. And so I have a touchscreen that uses the pen with a small research group, and then I'll put that up and then start drawing, and then they can see it. So I'm kind of thinking that's not a bad way maybe to, instead of writing on the board, I just write like that. Any comments on that?
So can I repeat back, Beth, what I think I heard you say? You have a bamboo tablet and you have a pen.
I have a bamboo pen.
You have a bamboo pen.
I have a ThinkPad, a PC.
Mm-hmm.
And I have PDF annotator on the PC. So I write on it. I use it actually for classes. I've used it for online classes where I make video lectures. So what I'm thinking is for my classes that aren't going to work very well with video lectures, where I really need the interaction, have a Zoom meeting and, put up that PDF annotator, either a blank screen or something, and then write on it like I would write on the board.
Beth, someone in the chat box is asking if you can type in the names of those different apps you were just describing.
Okay, let's see, now it's looking different and I'm not, okay, chat. Yeah, okay, so let's see. ThinkPad, so that's just a PC. And then
while you're typing those, unless you had other things, I can give Ray some other questions from that.
Okay, sure.
There's one question, one concern I have about keeping students motivated. Keeping them motivated in an online class is generally a challenge, and I would expect even more of a challenge when it is an unexpected online class. Does anyone have concrete suggestions for things we could try to keep students motivated both during class and outside of class? And this is from someone who plans to keep their class synchronous.
Any thoughts from the folks who are panelists currently?
I was just going to ask that, hi, this is Suzanne Doree again, that I think that's the hardest thing and worthy of really thinking hard about that. We're talking about doing at least some synchronous check-in for those who are able to attend, where maybe that would help some students stay engaged, that we have a big picture conversation, talk about something exciting, also make sure they're tracking their way through the course appropriately, even if the instruction is not synchronous, to give a synchronous option. Some of my faculty won't necessarily be able to do it because of their own childcare and other issues, but where possible, But I think I've identified probably the greatest challenge, particularly for students who picked a face-to-face learning environment to begin with. How do we do that? How do we share that, communicate that excitement, that interest, motivation, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know how your students are reacting, but from my college, one of the professors posted today how many, they just decided today that after tomorrow, all classes are, it was sort of abrupt for the students, and that the seniors were all dropping by the professor's office to say goodbye when they didn't anticipate saying goodbye. And so they're saying goodbye to each other, they're saying goodbye to their friends, they're saying goodbye to their college in a way that they thought, you know, they may have been having senioritis, but they didn't really want to leave tomorrow. And so I think, maybe the plus side is they will be missing each other, and this will be a chance for them to have a touch point with each other. They may be feeling isolated from the community that they were a part of, but at the same time, I think we can't ignore the fact that for a lot of them, this is just incredibly disruptive, and it may take them a while to get their heads back, and you've asked them to move, when they weren't anticipating it. And we all know, most of us know how disruptive that can be.
I just want to remind everybody, when you post a comment or question to the chat box, make sure you're posting it to all panelists and attendees. If it only goes to all panelists, then only the people who you can see on the screen are able to read it.
And we do hope you'll answer each other's questions in the chat box if you don't feel like participating in this visual way. The other thing I'm wondering about is right now, the way that we're communicating with each other is not accessible necessarily for deaf and hard of hearing folks. And or blind folks, right? If I'm not typing or it's not in the chat window. So I also wonder about accessibility options. So yesterday we did talk a little bit about the captioning that was raised again today. But if other people have other suggestions about that, at MAA we've been looking into real-time captioning for talks at meetings, but the technical content is a huge issue, especially in mathematics. So if anyone has experience with automated captioning, or another option, a colleague of mine wasn't able to write, and so they had a student scribe. So I think another interesting thing to think about is, having how the students in your class can participate in gathering the information from the course and sharing it with each other, but again, in real time. Now, look at what my screen's doing right now. Can you all see this? Like, somehow the lighting is getting weird. And as far as I know, maybe a cloud went overhead, but maybe not much. So again, those kinds of things are interesting and worth thinking about. You can see, you don't want to be backlit necessarily, but the interesting thing here is I'm frontlit and it's still.
Yeah. So one idea for captioning that I've used in my online classes is to go ahead and post it to YouTube, and YouTube will automatically closed caption it for you if you wish, and then go back and look at the script and manually edit when you see words that aren't the correct translation.
I've also done that, and it works great, especially for math classes where the auto transcriber will get your words wrong. It's just going to happen. So if you go back and edit it, it will have the correct content, but it's not as much work as transcribing it yourself.
Have people tried using rev.com?
Can you explain what that is, Yvonne?
It's a, I think I might be getting it. I think it might not be rev.com, but something else. But there's a service online that you can pay something like 2 cents per minute of audio recording that does transcription for you, and it's automated. And I've had a lot of good luck having transcriptions of interviews done in a math education context where we're even talking about advanced content. So it's not perfect, and it just like with the YouTube captioning, it sounds like you have to go back in and manually fix some things, but that might be another option. I don't know. I've never done the YouTube one, so I can't compare and contrast.
There. Oh.
Okay, yeah. So Rev.com is, that's right. Rev.com has a like child company that does automated transcriptions. Rev.com has human transcribers, and then they have there's another company, and I'll look it up in a sec.
There's a number of questions in the chat box about doing group work and breakouts in online learning. And I'd like to share a little bit of the things I know about and then open it up. Many of the online learning management systems like Blackboard, but also others, have an automatic ability for you to assign students to groups. And you can post one assignment and it goes automatically to those groups. You can either tell it I want 5 people per group, or I want groups, I want 7 groups, and it will divide people up and then they'll do their work in their groups. If you want to do, you can still do asynchronous IBL and other kinds of really creative kinds of group work. You just have to give them timelines. So for example, some of the activities I ask my students to do, they have to post their initial response by a certain time. Then by another time, you know, they have 3 or 4 days, they have to respond to a minimum of N of their group mates. And, you know, you give them strategies like that so that they can, it's not as satisfying as synchronous communication, but it does get them interacting with each other. One thing I would say to be careful of is give them not just a minimum amount they have to say, but a maximum, because some students will write paragraphs and paragraphs if you're doing something that has a verbal component to it, and that gets hard for everyone to read. Does anyone have other things about group work?
So what we use at my campus is Microsoft Teams. And in the past, before we got Teams, I've used Slack. And I find that to be a really good platform because it's more like texting than it is like a discussion board. So students will have a more natural conversation with each other. You can also make a class for your team and then make channels that individual students can only see. So if you have like a group, you can make a channel just for that group and they can discuss within that channel in a place where you can still see it. Or they can do private messaging with each other. So I think both Slack will do that and Teams. Discord, I think, can do that as well, though I'm not sure about Discord and FERPA. FERPA is one issue that I've had with these sorts of online chat platforms. Thankfully, now we have Teams through the university, but I know that when I was using Slack to satisfy FERPA, we had to actually use the paid version of Slack. So that's a conversation to have with your university if you want to use one of these chat platforms.
Thanks, Georgia. Susie, did you have something to add?
I was just wondering, once we're finished with this topic, if we could come back to testing. That seems to be of concern.
And I also want to say there's a lot of ideas going on in the chat box. So either look at that, or Ray, can we save the chat box and maybe circulate that to people?
My understanding is that because I'm recording, the chat window will be also sent to me in a text file that we can then share as part of the Google Doc. So hopefully, if all goes well, yes. But Abby, why don't you go ahead and read some of those ideas out?
Well, there's a lot of things like different platforms. So has otter.ai does wonderful transcripts for free, or I use rev.com a lot for research interviews, but it charges $1.25 a minute. If your campus has the Google Suite, maybe Google Hangouts would be a good way to do group work. Someone posted a link for accessibility issues and so on. So there's a lot of
Is there anything about testing? Could we pivot back to the, because since yesterday and today, I would say a majority of the concerns I've seen on social media have really been around testing. And I think the concerns have had maybe two strands. One strand has just been about, should I be thinking about it in a different way, period? For example, should I be using online quizzing or, you know, the equivalent of online clickers or some gamification, or should I do things the way I always have? I guess a second strand has been about the use of resources. Do I want my students, when they're taking an exam, to have the whole internet as their resource. Some people have shared lockdown kinds of browsers that the students can use. So if anybody can tell us a little bit more about that, how you use a lockdown browser. And yesterday there was also somebody who described a fairly elaborate process of having the student sit down to take the test. Oh, sorry. Sit down to take the test and then take their own, while they're on camera being recorded, take their own phone, like record around the room, show all the things in the room, pick up all the things on the desk, show their paper, say, I have 5 sheets of paper, here's the paper, there's nothing on the paper, or this is my OneNote sheet that you've allowed me, this is my OneNote sheet. Just fairly elaborate routines to have the student around academic integrity, to do the best you can to understand that students are doing the thing you're asking them to do with a set of resources you hope that they're using for those resources and nothing more. But I think this is a huge source of concerns, and especially I heard from people, I have 83 students in my class, but they do, you know, they had various ways. They also would say, okay, at 2:36, please write the word fish in the bottom right-hand corner of your paper. And so they wanted them to have an open channel while they were doing their exam, and they would say, okay, write the time and the word fish on the bottom right-hand part of your paper, so that then the student has a record of what you've asked them to do at that time in the exam. So, you know, I think all of these things are not things we really want to be thinking about, but I know from the online discourse that people are thinking about them.
So another option is to rethink whether you really need to be that meticulous about whether they're conforming to your normal academic integrity standards. If you think about the assignments you give them as being all open book, open notes, open internet, and just design your assessments accordingly, it makes it a lot easier for you to not have to worry about those additional things.
Right. And that's I mean, it's a huge ask, I think. I think the interesting thing is their jobs will be like that, right? Their jobs that they will go to eventually will be open note, open book, open internet. And so
and that's how doing math is, right? You're never solving a problem in a room. And no matter which of these systems you try to enact, try to prevent them from looking things up, there's always a way around it. There's something else that they can do if they really are that motivated. So if you design your assessments to just not worry about that, you save yourself a lot of trouble, although then you have a lot of work to do to figure out what those assessments should be.
Yeah. So I would love to hear some experience in the room of people who are already teaching online, how they like to do formative assessment as well as summative assessment. I'm just going to wait a minute and see if anybody could compose some thoughts to share with us.
I haven't done this for an online course, but I have administered my final exams online. And this was for a small upper division class. So this was a course for future high school teachers. And the size of the class was 10 to 20. And I only say that because I suspect it's relevant. And the reason why I did that was because our assigned exam time was like 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And I thought that was kind of unreasonable for the non-traditional students. But what I did is I mean, you know, I told them that they should work individually. I don't think that actually happened. I think that there was cheating. But on the other hand, I found that even when people were cheating, there were still differences between what was handed in and the reasoning. And so what I did is I posted a secure PDF of the test, and I used, and I put this on Canvas. And so if you post it as a quiz, if you post it as a quiz on Canvas, I think it tells you what time they began. And so I just said, look, you have 2.5 hours or whatever amount of time to complete this. Canvas will tell me when you download this, like when you start. And so that's how I'm going to keep track. When they open the Canvas quiz or whatever I used, they get a link to a PDF that's secured. And then after they, click and say that they won't cheat or whatever, then they're given the password to unlock that PDF. And so, of course, people can just share the PDF and share the password, but I figured making it a little bit more difficult makes it harder to have somebody share the PDF with another person. And then they just submitted a PDF of their work or a Word document also through Canvas. And in my experience, like I've done this now like 6 or 7 times. And I find that homework is collaborative, and homework grades actually predict midterm grades, which are proctored. And these also predict the final exam grades, even though there's cheating. And so I kind of felt okay about that, just because I felt like, well, their abilities, like what they're doing is like somehow represented anyway.
I wanted to jump in on top of what Yvonne just said. Most of us, and my university hasn't decided what we're doing yet, but most of us are probably in a situation where we have collected proctored work from our students already, and would now be giving unproctored work to our students. So we have a norm of what we expect the student to do. We always hope our students will improve dramatically as the semester goes on, of course, but most don't. So if you were to give something, however you proctor it or however you structure it, if the grade were to deviate significantly from that existing norm, so you've taught face-to-face, say the first half of the semester, you could certainly follow up with individual students for whom that was true. You could have a follow-up quick 5-minute conversation on Zoom about, hey, walk me through this problem or something. So I do think you could use interventions when it appears to be different from the previous assessments. Another thing that is top of my mind, because I chair a department where a large percentage of my classes are taught by adjunct faculty members, is that my adjunct faculty members are not going to all of a sudden, with no professional development, recreate tests that have a higher order Bloom's taxonomy, find fair grouping rubrics, and do that and be willing to do it for what we're paying them. So I don't have that option for most of my faculty to do something more creative. Down the road, sure, and that's a conversation we should have. But for right now, my adjuncts are like, well, how are you securing the environment so I can give the same test I've always given online to this next group? So we are looking at lockdown devices and other things. I posted one to the chat that a colleague of mine loves and has a free 2-month trial, which given our current situation is exactly the right price to talk to a provost about. There are others available that are probably way better, but don't have that. Everybody can cheat on everything. We've had students sitting in front of instructors send pictures of their tests to classmates in the same room in real time, and the instructor didn't notice it in the class. So they're cheating while you're watching them too, is what I always tell everybody. So, obviously, the more we can emphasize why we are doing an individual assessment, why we want to know what they know and how it's valuable to them to submit their own work, the better. Anyway, I know some of you may teach in environments that have honor codes. We don't have a code, like that. We have a policy, of course, about cheating. And anyway, an ineffective policy, I would say. So just some food for thought there. I don't know if that helps or hurts the cause.
So there's a comment about this in the chat box that says, I have also given online exams and required handwritten scratch work to be scanned by students and uploaded within a half hour of the end of the exam. It's not perfect, but at least they're writing the work out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have to balance that against these students who might not have the access to do that as immediately. But
I guess because people can take pictures of things with their phones now, it's a little bit more accessible to more people, if not all people.
Right, and at least then they have to show their handwriting.
I've had, so my students don't really know how to produce PDFs with tech, say. And so what I actually ask them to hand in, although I ask for it to be in PDF, is that I just suggest that they take photos of their work with a phone. And then their phone can usually, and then they can usually send it to themselves somehow and get it on their computer. and then to put them in a Word document and then print the Word to PDF.
Some of the publishers have free online testing software, and someone just posted a note that Wiley just sent out a notice that they're going to give free access for anyone that uses their textbooks for the rest of the semester. And I think I've seen that from some other publishers as well.
Good to know. So Susie, can you maybe seat us with, you're the one who asked a little bit about testing, is that right? Do you have some questions in mind that you might want to pose now that we've talked about it a little bit?
We did talk about it a little bit, I guess. Yeah, I'm mainly concerned about how to maintain academic integrity. But someone, I think it was Sue Doree, had mentioned that they cheat when we're standing right in front, which is absolutely true. But like, at what point should I stop worrying about it? And, you know, I guess even with some of these lockdown browsers, unless you're physically watching these students with some kind of a camera, yeah, you might lock down one browser, but why couldn't they go to some tablet nearby and look at something? And, you know, even thinking about the more basic math courses, say calculus and algebra, where you could just go to Wolfram Alpha, type it in, and it shows step-by-step work. How can you get around that? And that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and I guess I would particularly like to hear from people who have taught large numbers of students per section, 80 students or 200 students, because I can think of some things that you could do when you're having more, you know, one-to-one interaction with students, because you in some ways get to know their style, or if you're their homework grader, you know, you can really kind of see what's going on with them. If they come to office hours, even if they're virtual, you know, you have this better handle on what's going on. But as the class sizes get larger, so if somebody could raise their hand, whether or not they feel like they have the answer to this, like, what do you do with your very large sections when you're interacting online? I'd love to hear from people. Or if you have something that didn't work, you know, share that as well. So we could either think about how to make it work, or we could avoid it because we think it won't work. Is there anything coming up in chat, Abby?
I haven't seen anything. Let me look again. There's a lot of sharing of tips and tools, that apps that people can use, and the experience they have with their apps. One person just said, on the point we were just discussing, I teach Calc 1, and I feel like students can get through a lot of the procedural parts of the course without being forced to learn a thing by using these online resources and online testing.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else said timing a test can be somewhat helpful. There's quite a few apps being listed in the chat box, so we should definitely keep track of those and circulate those.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question whether, I'm curious on a national scale, whether everyone moving to online so quickly is going to force people back to doing even more procedural work, or whether it could provide some opportunities for project-based work, because there's this time factor that students have that's a little different than it used to be, and that they might embrace the idea of interacting with each other around a project, because again, they're getting social isolation other ways. So I would love to I mean, as a proponent of project-based learning, I would love to think about ways that it would be possible to do more project-based learning. Yeah. Neil, did you have something you want to say?
Yes, I did want to ask a question, and it has to do with academic integrity. I teach some of the beginning math classes, and I have lots of students that do extremely well on their online homework and extremely poorly on in-class quizzes and tests. And those are the ones that I'm concerned about. And it's nothing about going to another iPad and looking at a different browser. It's about having your smart friend standing right next to you, helping you with that test. I know that's going to happen. And I feel like we're going to be setting up students for failure if we allow that to happen, because they'll pass my algebra class, and then they'll be in some class they shouldn't be in next term. And so, they're not going to make it. So to me, that's the most critical worry.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and so I could think of a few different reasons that a student might do that. So one of them, like you said, is they got so much help on the homework that they never got to that independent stage that you're talking about where they could do something. I've also had students who just, the timed situation and the pressure of an in-class exam, it's a student that I know individually could do things with me in office hours, even though I wasn't helping them. I was just sitting there and they felt more confident because I was sitting there, and then they got to the exam and choked and couldn't do things. So I think there's probably more than one reason that would happen. And, you know, maybe one is more an issue with how we're testing for the student who chokes, who actually has capability that the exam isn't showing because of the pressure of the timing or whatever. And then what you're saying is the more educational concern, which is I'm worried that my assessments won't show what they do or don't know, because in some sense their helper might be with them while they're doing the assessment in the same way that they're doing the homework, and they aren't going to get that level of independence.
Exactly.
And I guess an interesting societal question is, at work, do you have to work independently or not? I mean, I think that's an interesting question. Like, what does it mean in a real work environment to pull your own weight and be independent versus work? And, you know, there's so much discussion about teams and collaborations in the work environment. So in some sense, in real work, we're rarely totally on our own, but at the same time, we really need to pull our own weight and bring our own value and bring our own independence of thought. So
well,
I
even
think,
even in a group environment, even at work, you know, after my very long career as an engineer, you could tell instantly which of your group members really knew stuff and really could contribute versus those that were just sitting there. So yes, the work world is group oriented, but that still requires every bit of capability that you need to get.
yeah.
But also some of these challenges, given that we're all moving to this so suddenly, some of these challenges are going to be harder to overcome than others. So we all need to think about what are the most important pieces of this we need to address, and just accept the maximum of, you know, good is better than perfect. Good is more accessible than perfect. And perfect just might not be something you can get to right now.
Yeah. So thank you for raising that issue, because I hear what you're saying, and I actually think that the question you were raising, or the concerns, are what I am seeing on social media as a more widespread concern of just the purpose of assessment. The purpose of individual assessment is to assess the person's individual progress.
Right.
And you're feeling like that capability of even pretending that we're assessing individual progress may go out the window. In a totally unproctored environment, and what, you know, what will happen, and what's your responsibility to your students to try to help make sure that they're ready, and maybe that responsibility falls more on them at this point.
Well, I do want to make one more point, and that is that our answer about this on March 12th could be different than our answer about this on April 12th. What I mean is, we don't know where this whole COVID-19 is going. And I'm thinking I can just postpone a test for now and avoid the issue. And then in 2 or 3 weeks after spring break is over, and maybe, you know, everyone's settled down and maybe we're back to in-person classes, I'll just do one super test instead of 2 normal tests. You know, so, you know, delaying isn't obviously a horrible idea.
I guess to add to that, one thing I have seen people saying online is that they are thinking about maybe the opposite of that, which is lower stakes, more frequent quizzing, to hopefully encourage students not to be needing, you know what I mean? So instead of having a high stakes at a longer increment, try to make these things lower stakes with more of them, so you feel like you don't have to cheat because you'll get another chance, or maybe some mastery-based testing or quizzing where you're allowed to quiz until you get it right. So again, the emphasis is on mastery over time, not just getting it right the first time or in a certain amount of time. And maybe that's sort of the crisis of this situation gives us the flexibility to explore kinds of teaching that you know would allow students to do that. One of the advantages of the Wiley or the other publisher-based online quizzing softwares is that you do potentially have that chance to say the student can do it over and over until they do it well. I think then the flip side of that is it does tend to be procedural type questions. And so, you know, how deep is the thinking going into those. So thank you. It's 2:55, so I want to be mindful of the time. It's been a whole hour, can you believe it? And I actually have this channel open for 2 hours, but that was mainly because I was concerned that we would hit over 100 participants and we would have people getting bounced out, but we've actually stayed at about 75 to 86 participants over the time. So my sense is that probably everybody who wanted to be in this space was in. I just want to encourage anybody who hasn't spoken up on the video here to, I see a hand raised, to please feel free to contribute. And I wanted to ask Abby, are there any sort of closing remarks from the chat window?
Yes, I do want to read a few things because some people are still sending things just to all panelists.
So I guess what I'd love to say is it's 2:56. If you would like to sign out at this time, I think this is a good time maybe for people to leave. If you feel like I wanted to do this for an hour and I don't want to be rude, you're very welcome at this moment to to do the next thing you need to do. I know everybody's time. So whoever's been here who needs to leave right now, thank you so much. Abby and I are delighted to have hosted you. And yeah, thank you. I just want to give everybody a chance to say goodbye, and then we'll reopen, and maybe there'll be fewer participants and more people that, bye Sue, that want to participate. So thanks to everybody who's contributed both in the chat window and online. So let's give just a minute for people to leave. So I think that was appropriate because we were down from 86 to 49.
Okay, so I actually have to go in a couple of minutes too, so I'll just share a couple of things from the chat window that are pertinent to this discussion. One person said, I was just thinking that pointing out to students that grade success this semester is different from preparedness for the future. A lower grade could actually be better for them in long term, and some students may take this to heart and do what they need to do to actually focus on learning instead of the grade. There's a million thank yous, so I'm looking for the other comments in between that.
That's so nice.
A few comments that noted that a number of colleges and public schools have closed for the rest of the semester. And then another on this same topic is, I think it's worth asking what kind of deception we're trying to prevent. Do we want to keep our students from deceiving us on assessments or themselves? Because I think the second one is the real danger and might be better to address this directly. So, on that note, thank you. I'm sorry I can't stay for the rest of this.
Thank you so much, Abby.
In the transition.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Is anybody willing to take over Abby's role of chat window minder? Because I find it fairly impossible to do both. I'm still promoting some folks to panelist.
What does it mean? What does it mean to take on Abby's role?
Oh, Yvonne, if you were to take on Abby's role, you would open the chat window and you would just be reading. While I'm listening to the people actually talking, you would be reading what people are typing. And then if there's a question that people might want raised, you would say, hey, Ray, there's something in the chat window here that I wanted to comment to everybody.
Sure, I can do that.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, Kenneth.
Hello. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering if someone who has taught synchronous, I'm just jumping into this, by the way, like many people. And so I would like to, in the limited time perhaps that we have in this situation, sort of move my lecture class to the web. But I was wondering if someone who has taught synchronously can describe it. Do the students show up visually? Do they see one another? Is it easy for them to ask and answer questions? Is it, I guess we can have this hand raising, although I haven't seen things from your end. So I just wonder if someone who has done this could briefly describe what a class is like. If it's a normal, for us, 50-minute class at a designated time, synchronously. Thank you. I'll turn off my, I'll mute and just listen.
Okay, and you had a lot of questions. So one of them was just, I'm doing this for the first time. What is it going to look like? I know that one thing people said yesterday was you have to allow some of that startup time. You're not going to be able to just start the minute the class officially starts because there is that sort of gathering time. So you might think about what you want the students to be doing during that gathering time so that they know ahead of time when I enter the classroom environment, here's what I start doing. Even if there are still other people arriving or having technical difficulties, including the prof. What would other people, Yvonne?
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna, sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna say, I think that it doesn't have to look like one thing. And I think it also can depend on how many people you have in the class. So right now it just so happens that even before COVID-19 stuff, I was assisting with a class in Michigan State University. I live in Nebraska. Obviously, we did this online. And what we did is there were 8 people in the class, and so everybody just Zoomed in. And so I taught the class, you know, synchronously and virtually. And so in that case, I could see the students. If people had questions, they could put them in the chat window, but they could also just like ask the questions and raise their hands like normal. This was an 8-person class. And so I think that's like very different than if you had a 20-person class.
Or 100.
And then the other thing is that to do, oh, sorry, what did you say, Ray?
Oh, I just said 100 or 250, which is a reality for many folks. Yeah.
Right.
Kenneth, how many people are you teaching at a time?
These classes will be about 20.
Oh,
I
okay.
have 2 classes, and one is how to prove it. One is linear algebra. So these will be quite different in approach. So I'm juggling the 2 different types of teaching environments, but about 20 students. And I don't know if everybody will have access. We're still in class tomorrow, so I'll find out whether it's going to be possible to do synchronous, and I'll record it for those who can't join. But I appreciate all this discussion, by the way. I'm going to mute and turn off my camera, but thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I know if in the Google Doc that I shared, Annalisa Cornell shared a list of questions that she surveyed her students. You may find that useful for tomorrow, that was just trying to gather some of that information. So it's a resource for that too.
I wanted to say one more thing about the synchronous. If there's a way to flip your class in any way, one option might be to have a synchronous chat. And so that might require less internet bandwidth from your students if you can just have a, like, you know, some sort of just a chat box or channel of some sort. I haven't done this personally, but I have a friend who teaches for Art of Problem Solving, and they run their classes via chat. And so at some point I asked him how this actually works, including how you do diagrams or equations. And he said that, you know, actually in some ways it's an advantage to not be able to draw in class, because then students have to describe what they're thinking of in words. And what you can do is you can then draw something on your tablet or paper or whatever and say, oh, is this what you mean? And share a diagram that way.
There was a request in the chat for people to share sort of 1-minute ideas. So I was saying maybe you could have your 1 minute before class. And I even wonder if, yeah, I mean, I always had students write in journals in my courses, and they were very quick questions. So sometimes they would be about the course, like how's the course going? And other times they would be very much get to know you questions like, what new music should I be listening to? Or, you know, have you seen a movie you like lately? Or, you know, what's something you're looking forward to doing, you know, on the weekend? Or if you had a blank, what would you blank? And even though those kinds of questions seem not very important, it actually was important for the students to have that this person cares about me relationship. And this, I did this even in very large classes. I didn't When I did it in writing, I didn't write back very much. I would just write back great, or me too, or oh yeah, or even just smiley face, but they would know that I had seen that. And so I wonder if some of those things would be even more important in a time that students are feeling less connected to you because they're disconnected by distance. Georgia, were you going to add something?
So what I will typically do with my classes, I don't teach synchronously online very much. I mostly record videos and teach asynchronously, but I have times where I'll tell my students, okay, I'm going to be on Teams responding to questions right away from this hour to this hour. And a lot of students will just drop into chat. And what I do during those times as well is I'll put up a quiz yourself problem, because in my class, I always talk to my students about how to learn as well as the math content itself. And one of the best ways to learn is by quizzing yourself. So the students, they know that it's not for points. So I'm sure some of them don't do it, but I've found that a lot of them do it, and we'll have really good conversations about that.
I love this question in the chat window. I teach mathematics of games, strategy games, board games, and require students to play with pieces and pairs for part of class. Any suggestions for how to implement this? So it's a narrow question of focus, but one of my friends who teaches ceramics at a university was like, how am I going to do this? And it made me feel like sometimes you need a little perspective on like how hard it's going to be to teach what we're teaching. And you think, you know, probably no one's really virtually taught ceramics at a university in a while. So any questions about that? There was another question about how to access a video from yesterday's session. I have the video. There's some FERPA issues with yesterday's video, and we at the MAA are just trying to figure out what our capability is for reviewing these videos, and just all of that issue around whether to share the video. So I'm recording this today. I can't promise that we're going to share. I can promise that at least for yesterday's, I will try to curate the ideas out of it and share them somehow. But we're just trying to. This is all new and came up pretty fast and didn't have a communication plan per se. So give me some patience on that, and I will very much try to share. There were some great conversations yesterday. I would say we've covered a lot today, and the things we haven't covered today, I pretty much typed into the Google Docs. So there is a lot there. And you're welcome. Yeah. Somebody asked about MAA Connect. So MAA Connect is MAA's Mathematical Association of America's new online community platform. And we are starting a group there for these discussions. And there's also a library feature. So we will be porting things from this into there as well as making some things open. Did you see anything else, Yvonne, in the chat? Because there's a lot going by. And thanks, Benjamin Gaines, for reposting that link. It looks a little funny in terms of the edit. It looks like that's related to an edit request. So if that link doesn't work for people, maybe Kat, maybe you can try it and just let me know if that works in the chat window.
So far, it's just about accessing Zoom and the Google Doc.
Okay.
MAA Connect.
Oh, what Google Doc? Okay. Yep. So the Google Doc is something I really just started yesterday. And as I've been on social media and people have been posting interesting articles, I tried to curate a set of things that people could look at. So I could probably just share that. Let me see. Okay. So you all probably are there yourselves by now, but all right. Can you see this, Yvonne? And does it have us on top of the doc or just the doc? I tried to just share the doc. Do you see the people's faces?
No.
Okay, so that's something to know about Zoom sharing. So when you're on Zoom or one of these sharing devices and you share your screen, you have a choice to share a particular window or to share the whole screen. And a lot of times it's nice just to share a particular window so that if you have other windows open, those aren't popping up as well. So this is the doc that we're talking about. It's pretty cool. There's 46 people-ish in it now. This isn't a recommendation, so I just wanted to be really clear that none of this that's happening in this space or on the doc is a recommendation of the MAA. It's just that we want to be talking about these ideas. So we're not endorsing any particular idea. But what we have here are, at the top, these links will take you down to the item. That's actually, if you haven't used it, it's a nice feature of Google Docs that you can create headers, and then it will automatically, you can set it up to automatically create a table of contents. So if you want to learn how to do that, just look up Google Doc table of contents. So I didn't generate this. I just generated a table of contents, and then I had headers. And then you can see, right here, I can update it if I added more headers. But interesting. So what I've got here are, I started with some discussion topics, but then people started posting resources. So here's some articles. I'd love to post some more articles that are especially for first-time folks. So here's a couple of things that people posted that are especially for people doing this for the first time. There's a couple of samples. There's a sample questionnaire that I mentioned and a sample email to students. It's sort of like we're all in this together. I adore you. I'm gonna miss you. Let's do this online learning thing kind of sample email. Privacy issues, just be aware of all the, I think some folks mentioned FERPA considerations. It's really important. Can you hear my dog barking? We talked about that. There's information here about when your children or your fur children interrupt your teaching. There's a lot on Zoom, but I'm not necessarily promoting Zoom over other ways of doing things. Does anyone know of any other Twitter threads? So the two I've seen are COVID Campus and digital pedagogy. But I think, for those who do follow education items on Twitter, I think there are some that are a lot like this kind of informal conversation, trying to share resources. Some things about Google Slides. I would love to see more about this formative assessment. How do we maybe build in lower stakes formative assessments so students engage more, can engage more honestly in these things. Things about scanning, things about so these are actually formal courses that you can take on teaching online in a MOOC kind of way. A lot of colleges have posted continuity plans. So this is one that people shared today. Then this is sort of hodgepodge advice. So these are basically pages like this. This is a meta page. So this is a page of pages like this page. And then here's the questionnaire I mentioned from Annalisa, which is, all of this is reposted with permission. But these are the questions she asked her students. And I think, one thing we didn't talk as much about today is real concern for rural students, that they're not going to have the bandwidth to do some of the things that we may want them to do. So asking, on a scale of 1, slow, unreliable to fast, really fast and reliable at 5, how would you rate the internet connection you expect to have while you're away? I think is a really important question to ask. And then here's sort of a question: do you expect to be available during our usual class times? Do you have family members you're going to need to look after? Those kinds of things. And then here's just a sample. Yesterday, people asked for a sample of an email that would sort of be a communication to your students about this transition, just to acknowledge what your expectations are from them, how you're handling things. And so Heather Russell allowed me to repost this that she posted today on Facebook. So I hope that's helpful. And I'll continue adding to this. And I'm trying to organize it as I add it so that you can go up to the top and not have to always scroll down. And everyone can add comments. So anyone who has the link, you feel free to share the link, and anyone who has the link can post comments, and then as I'll incorporate things. But yeah, that's the doc.
Okay, so then there's a question. I'm not sure if you answered it, whether it's okay to share the link to the Google Doc with departmental colleagues.
Please. Yep.
Okay, and then there's a couple of questions about how to share Zoom recordings if you're an instructor. And then let's see, I think someone, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, said that their understanding is that it cannot be posted on YouTube, but you could use your course management software. I haven't myself looked into this, so I don't actually know the answer.
That the video couldn't be posted on YouTube, is that what you're saying? Yeah. Again, this is the FERPA consideration, I think. You really want to preserve your students' right to make mistakes in class and not have those mistakes become public in some way, right? Or preserve forever to be shared back with them at some later date in a way that they don't want, wouldn't want. If we're going to create spaces for us all to learn and make mistakes, it's hard to have that all recorded in a public way and shared in a public way. So it's worth thinking about. In terms of how to share, when you set up the Zoom meeting to begin with, you tell Zoom through just a set of questions whether or not you want it to be recorded, and you have two choices. You can record to your device or record to the cloud. And my understanding from asking around is that recording to the cloud is a good idea. And if you do record to the cloud, then you'll get an email afterwards that has the link. And I think in your account, it will also show all the recordings that you've done when you log in online to your account. So there's a couple of ways. And that's when I think you get the transcript also of the chat window. And then those can be edited after. I was asking someone about whether the softwares themselves have the editing features or whether you would need to download and then use a video editor. A video editor that was recommended to me that's free online is Olive. I just downloaded it today, so I can't speak to it, but I've heard that it has a lot of very cool features that are that work well and are similar to a professional video editing program, but it's free.
And then there's also been a question about recommendations for managing tutoring. How can students be assigned to available tutors? So I guess, let's see, who asked this question? Melinda? Can I ask a follow-up? When you say tutoring, do you mean like a tutoring lab? Do you mean like office hours? What's the context here? Are you still there?
All right, you know what I didn't do, which I could do, is make everybody a panelist at this point because we have so few people. So I am going to promote you all.
Well, there's a yes exclamation point, tutoring lab office hours. So all the things.
All right, we are.
I actually have done online before via Skype. And that actually worked pretty well. And I just used I did a very like old school DIY where I just used, I had a webcam that I just pointed to a piece of paper and I would write things. So like I would write things and then go like, okay, so do you see what I mean? Like, look at this circle over here. And then I would ask questions that way. And that seemed to work pretty well. And then sometimes what I would do, like for office hours where there's just like one or two other people and me, I would say something like, do you want me to give you some time alone to think about it? And then I'll come back. And then what I would do is I would turn the webcam like toward my keyboard so they wouldn't see me. And then I would like go get a drink of water or like, you know, dust my bookshelves, you know, whatever. And that like creating that little extra space seemed to also be helpful.
All right, your reward for being here this long is we get to meet you in face as well as name. So feel free if you want to build some community by turning your camera on. Don't feel like you have to, but we can all wave to each other.
I had a question, if that's all right. So with online instruction, students going from face-to-face instruction, online instruction, I have a concern that some of them will crash and burn. So I was wondering, are y'all considering being more lenient with like incompletes and stuff like that?
More than 32. Oh, and someone is unmuted, so I hear their little person, which is awesome. Could be Jason. Jason, I might hear your little. That's about the person speaking's window lighting up, as you know whose little people might be talking. So Jason, can you just mute? Or if you want to join in, can you make a comment? All right, well, let's see. I'm going to try something. So if this happens, I believe, haha, look at that, I have the power. Perhaps? All right. That worked somehow. Hi, everybody. It's so much more fun this way, actually, I must say, to have you all be visible instead of just some of us.
So we haven't necessarily talked all that much about incompletes as a leniency measure, but it definitely did come up in the context of if there are like equity concerns about being able to finish the class, being much more ready to apply that as a possible solution. But yeah, I don't know in terms of the crash and burn angle. That's not something Trinity's talked about.
Yeah, and I wonder if we're doing more a mastery approach where you get as many chances as you want. Does the crashing and burning just look like slowing to a halt because you're not progressing or getting past a stage to the next stage? Or does, you know, I guess that it could take the form of just sort of disappearing, right? And you can't go send someone to the dorm to make sure they're okay or that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of forms of that we could think about. And so again, maybe those informal check-in questions will be even more important now. What do other people think? It's tricky, right? I mean, you don't want to be so lenient that it causes a student more problems, but you also don't want to force anyone forward when they're just not ready. So it's tricky. All right, let's leave that one on the table for a minute.
Oh, can we go back to the tutoring centers? And does anybody here run a tutoring center or a resource center for their department? Yeah, what are you doing about that?
Fives, I saw you raise your hand. Would you be willing to share with us if you all are just starting to think about what's up with your tutoring center or how that might or might not change over time?
We don't know. So that's where we're at right now. So okay. I saw the link and I was like, I'm gonna come here and find that out.
Okay, well, maybe let's brainstorm a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about what you need to be doing, and maybe we can think about which resources might be the most helpful?
I run an emporium. So they come and they use the computers and we help them out. So we're trying to figure out how to do that online. I don't know if we do the Brady Bunch thing here or I don't know. We'll figure all that out.
And that emporium has 100 or 200? How many students at a time are at the emporium?
We seat 30.
30, okay.
It's a converted classroom.
Okay. So this is 24 that I can see right now here in Brady Bunch style. So that's not
I'm
too
only
bad.
looking at 9.
Oh,
I got here late.
So I don't know if you've got speaker view. So there's two views. There's speaker view and gallery view. Speaker view puts one person big and everybody else is sort of at like a film strip at the top. And up on the upper right hand side, if you click on the 9 squares, it'll move you to gallery view. And if your window is big enough, let me make my window smaller to see if it wrecks this. Yeah, if your window is big enough, if your window is too small, you'll see an arrow on the right-hand side that says, mine says 1 of 3, and so I can sort of flip through the participants in 3 different screens, which each have, for me, 10 people per screen. But if I expand my window out big enough, I can see everybody, which is a a 5 by 5, so I can see 25 at a time. And I don't know if that's the max if they decided that's, we only have 24 participants, so I'm not sure if we had 30, whether it would just look like tiny little people.
I am on an iPad through the app, and it's 9 at a time. And you can swipe left and swipe right to get to a different 9.
Yeah. So that's your limit for your device. But if you were on a larger monitor, it's possible you could see more. And so it is possible if you switch to either 25 instead of 30, this would possibly be an option. But with another, with another license, it could be different. But I have a feeling that many more than this if you didn't have a terrifically. Now I'm on a laptop. Does anybody has anybody at any time used one of these where you've had more than 25 faces looking at you? Because I didn't attempt to do this when we had 86 people.
On the laptop, we actually had 26 for like a minute, and we had to scroll right via an arrow. So, but
Okay.
25 looks like the most you can have on the laptop.
Okay. And that might be enough. That's a lot of humans.
There was a little bit of discussion about speaker view versus gallery view before, so I'm just going to take a moment to mention that I didn't actually see that button show up until I was made a participant, a panelist.
A panelist. Okay, so what did it look like as a participant?
As a participant, the enter full screen button next to it was there, but I didn't have a speaker view button.
So it was always in gallery view? It always was Brady Bunch?
Always gallery view.
Okay. So you all have stayed on this long. That's awesome. Is there something else you're hoping we'll talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
What
Yeah,
about office hours? Holding office hours, is that possible?
Yeah. So Joseph, when you think about office hours, do you think about students up at a board? Do you think about a bunch of students working with each other in your office? Do you think about it as more one-on-one?
I'm thinking having some open door amount of time so that students can ask questions without reserving the time.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So I actually held some office hours on Zoom on Tuesday. And so students kind of entered in, and, if they needed to show me something, a lot of times they had to hold a piece of paper up to their camera, but it was clear enough that I could kind of see what they were working through because they were working on, this was a Calc 2 class. Yes, kind of like that. And it worked relatively well. I do think, this was a conversation I was having with some colleagues, that currently, like with my in-person office hours, I'll do it for all my classes, like in the same window of time. I'll let whoever come by, basically. And I think that's going to be a lot harder to do kind of digitally, because I wouldn't want to put everyone together in the same Zoom chat, because I think that would be confusing for some of them if my kids who are in this mathematical thinking class are then hearing about integrals and stuff like that. I don't think that would work well. So then there was chat about maybe using the breakout room feature for that. But I'm unclear, because can you not use the breakout room chat option in this setup? Or because that was something we discussed at the beginning.
I've been asking my IT person that, and he thinks that our license isn't it isn't Zoom Pro. And my understanding is it's Zoom Pro that has the breakout room feature. But if anyone has other information, please share.
So we were using, my school also had a Zoom meeting today to talk about this stuff. And then some of us were messing around with it afterwards to just kind of get some experience. And we found that we could put each other into breakout rooms if we were in a meeting. I don't know if it's a meeting versus I don't remember, whatever this is.
Mm-hmm. This is a webinar.
Okay, so it may be a meeting versus webinar thing, because we were able to do the whiteboards, we were able to do the breakout rooms.
Okay, that's great.
In the meeting on a free account, just to be clear. I only have a free account.
That's great to hear. And I guess for me, So I wonder what you can't do in a meeting. My sense is that this ability, I think once everybody's in the meeting, they have the same status. And so I think the concern about having an 86-person meeting is you get Brady Bunch view with 86 people, everybody able to share their screen and everybody able to talk at any moment. Is that correct? That's my...
Only one person can share a screen at a time. So if one person is sharing a screen, no one else was able to share a screen, at least from our kind of playing around with it. But it can be chaotic because our Zoom meeting with our faculty, we had 80 some people in it, and it was a bit disaster. Like, it was just a lot of voices and a lot of confusion and the like. So I don't know how well that worked in that setting, but I think there's just also a lot of fear and confusion among faculty members about what's going on.
Feature, I believe, right?
No.
I really like that when you have over, I would say over 12 people, or maybe if it's a group that knows how to function really well, over 25 people, the ability to have 86 people where you know that, okay, this is a person that needs to talk and you can call on them. And then you can promote them to panelists like I was doing so that you could then see them when they were talking. I think my sense is that works better. But at the same time, if you're really trying to keep everybody engaged, you probably want everybody like this the whole time. So if somebody's doing this, you know, like, it's a little bit more obvious to everybody.
I think you can raise your hand in meetings also. It's just not nearly as intuitive how to do it. Like, you have to go to the participants menu, and then if you're in there, you can add reactions sometimes or do things like raise your hand or say, oh, it's going too fast or it's going too slow. But that was the participants menu that's on the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
It's not nearly as easy to see as it was when I think you were doing it earlier.
Okay. Well, it may be, if I'm doing this on a regular basis, a couple of people said I should try doing it with a meeting the next time and just compare how it goes, just as part of experimenting with all of this.
So I don't know if it.
And you. So
Georgia,
because you raised your hand.
I
Was
was just testing
if
I could.
Okay, Georgia, and then Lauren, and then Charles.
I was just testing if I could raise my hand as a panelist.
You can. Okay,
Yes.
Lauren, and then Charles.
I don't know if anybody else experienced this, and I don't know if it's just because you did it with a bunch of people all at once, but I also wanted to bring up that when you made everybody a panelist all of a sudden, it actually looked like Zoom crashed on my end because it kind of closed and reopened and had to reload as a panelist. So I actually lost a tiny chunk of time, and I was also wondering if it was intended to go that way. So just, you know, I agree that the notion of sort of promoting people to panelists and then back down as necessary is a reasonable idea, but just do be aware of that possibility.
That's interesting. The message I get, Lauren, is Lauren is being promoted to panelist and will re-enter the meeting as a panelist. So it does look, so from what you're saying, it does have to sort of kick you out and bring you back in again. And
Yes.
so it would be important to recognize not to be talking until you see that person pop back up on the screen, because then you've sort of, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
Something. Thank you. I didn't realize that, so that's helpful. Charles.
Hi. So yeah, I'm glad I tuned into this because I was kind of thinking that I would just hold my class via Zoom and, you know, share some information and materials with them and so on. But what this brought up that I hadn't thought of before were the FERPA issues. So I'm assuming that with an actual meeting, if I invite my students to a meeting or a webinar, I'm thinking maybe from my class of 13 or of 3, a meeting would work fine. That there aren't really any issues, that's just private among all the people who are there. Are the FERPA issues with sharing like recordings, or are there other FERPA issues? And I guess my other question is, I could do this from home with my iPad, but do I need to actually use my institution system for some of this stuff? Is there a reason to do that?
That's a great question. For me, so I am definitely not a FERPA expert. The things that have already come up here were, if you have a free version of things, it may be that the reason they're making it free is that they're using that information somehow to learn about machine learning or something. So there is some possibility that some employee of that company would see something. And if that something is sensitive information and that employee were not acting properly, then that information.
Ah, good point. So,
You know what I mean? And so it's sort of a question of what is the license that you're using. And I know that some people were saying that their institutions have a version of Zoom that's sort of the free version. They have a paid version that's FERPA, and they have medical people in their institution as well. So they have an extra high version of Zoom that's for HIPAA requirements. So there's sort of different levels of that. So it is worth thinking about. We also had a case where somebody was trying to demonstrate something, but they wanted to show the grade book, but then the grade book had some actual grades in it. And so you don't want to do that either, where you have,
sure,
even when you're trying to share things with each other, just being especially sensitive. My sense is that, I don't even know if class rosters are something, I mean, students know who else is in the class with them, but is a student allowed to know which students are in other classes? I don't know. So it's all those kinds of things that I think it would be, it may be that we need to ask institutions or, someone to come up with some guidelines for all of us. And maybe MAA can be helpful in trying to collect some of that information about how to be FERPA compliant when you're in an online space. I mean, we wouldn't make it up. We would go to an expert, but maybe that should be part of the professional societies. What we can do is help people with that.
I think that'd be helpful, because I know my colleagues have probably, and I had probably hardly thought about that, and it's good that it came up. And like I hadn't even occurred to me, like, they're going to be harvesting information. We don't know what they're harvesting and so on. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, some places are still leaving the quizzes graded outside the doors of the offices. That's definitely not FERPA compliant, so we all are adjusting. But I think, as we adopt ways of doing things we haven't, it's really good to think back. Yvonne, anything else in the chat? Or anybody who's joined or is here that hasn't shared anything? Or maybe, I'm just interested to know, has this been helpful? Have we failed to do something you hope to do here? I'm thinking about doing these on a regular basis, but this is only number 2. It's a pilot. Is this a good idea? How often should we do these? Should we be doing them every day for a while and then maybe go to once a week or twice a week? Should they be more, should I have an expert presenting for, 10 minutes of it, so that it's less informal and more formal? We are doing some of that through Project Next, but, would this space have been nicer if you could have actually heard an expert for 10 minutes?
Before tomorrow, I'm going to try getting more expertise in Zoom's features. I'm a total newbie. And so tomorrow I can approach this same discussion much more intelligently.
Thanks. Was there anything we didn't do that you really wish we had? I mean, we've got time.
I don't know that this has to be covered right away, but at the top of the discussion, we mentioned that asynchronous may be more equitable than synchronous, but we've actually spent all of our time talking about synchronous instruction.
Yeah, let's talk about asynchronous a little bit. Some people here said they do that. Raise your hand if you do raise your virtual or your real hand if you do asynchronous. Georgia, would you be willing to share a little bit about that? Like, what does that look like? Or what does it seem?
So this semester, I'm actually teaching statistics for educational research online, and it's a completely asynchronous class. So I do a few things for it. So the class is centered around learning basic statistics up through hypothesis testing and learning how to program in R. So I have videos for each unit. It's separated into 6 units. I keep the videos to less than 12 to 15 minutes each. That's been shown to be really important, is having really short targeted videos instead of like a full hour-and-a-half lecture like you might have in a face-to-face class. So they're targeted so the students know kind of what they're trying to get, what they have to take out of the video. I have regular due dates, which has also been shown to be really important for online classes, because you want to help enable the students to keep up with the class. One thing that I have noticed teaching online is that students might not take the class as seriously as they do a face-to-face class, and they tend to get behind more in an online class than in a face-to-face class. So anything you can do to enable that executive function on the part of the students, which I actually linked a really great article earlier from Universal Design for Learning and CAST on executive function in online classes. So they recommend a few things. One, having regular due dates. Two, making sure that you check in with each individual student during the semester and keep up with them. And I forgot what the third one is. I don't know if I still have the window open. Oh, and having a platform for students to talk with each other and to answer each other's questions. So as far as that platform is, I've mentioned it already during this meeting, but we use Teams because that's offered through my university. And it's FERPA compliant. In the past, I've used the paid version of Slack, which my university deemed also FERPA compliant. But having that platform to have informal conversations with your students, and so that they can ask questions and send pictures of their work and even have video conversations in kind of a less formal setup than something like Zoom is really important to the online class. What else was I going to say? So with Teams, the thing to look out for with that as an instructor, though, is that students will send you messages at the weirdest times. So they will be up working on their stuff at 2 in the morning, and you as an instructor just need to set the boundary ahead of time that you will not answer questions at 2 in the morning. You will answer them in a reasonable amount of time after that, say 24 hours, but you don't want students to have the expectation that you will answer right away, because sometimes they get the idea that just because it's this informal chat platform that you will answer them at all hours, which you don't want to. You want to separate that out and not spend all your time on the online class, which is easy to do. So I'm happy to answer any questions about teaching asynchronously.
Georgia, I'm going to text to everybody a summary of what you just said.
That's probably a good idea. It was a little bit rambling.
No, it was awesome.
No, that was great. That was not rambling at all.
I just want to make sure that you know, this might be just a way of making sure that I heard your ideas correctly, and also for other people to review and to ask questions.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you. Yeah, but that being said, I will answer my students' questions at weird hours sometimes because I don't have that much of a work-life boundary.
It's a good point. I mean, work-life boundary for all of us is going to be complicated.
And with an online class, that becomes really blurred, because with a face-to-face class, you have the class session, you have your office hours, and students might email you, but they usually don't. With an online class with really easy access to you as the instructor, they will message you at the drop of the hat, which is really nice in some ways because you get to know the students even if it's an online class, but it can also be overwhelming for an instructor that's not used to teaching online.
There was I'm trying to remember the name of it. There was a program that we used that was a question answer program, and I really liked it. I wish I could remember the name right now. Lauren, do you remember the name?
Was it Piazza?
Maybe it was Piazza, yeah.
It was Piazza, probably.
Okay, so the way Piazza works is that anyone can ask a question, and you could be you, it could be the students, and then anyone can answer the question. It could be you or it could be students. And when a student answers the question, the instructor can come in and upvote or the answer or not. And what that does is it gives other students, or if the answer is incorrect or there's a misconception there or a conception that needs a little bit of work, that you can chime in and say, oh, thank you. You know, that just reminds me to remind you that blah, 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 blah. You also need to take into consideration this other factor that maybe wasn't considered in this answer. What do you think it would be like? You know, and you have to be very careful. So what we noticed in Piazza is if the instructor comes in too harshly on an incorrect answer, no one will use it. So I think you have to be really, really careful in these spaces that are very public spaces in that kind of way to in your chats or in your communications to be very kind and be very constructive. But in the class I had where it worked really great, like I had most questions being answered correctly by other students, and not just by one other student, but by all the other students. You can even give points for students answering each other's questions, right? You can give points for students asking questions. And I think what I loved about that then, like Georgia was saying, was it allowed me to decide it was okay for me not to be checking in there every second. But you know, before I was going to give a quiz or an exam, I did go in there to make sure there wasn't any misinformation that was going to propagate, you know, into my exam. So I tried to, it was just part of my homework to check in on Piazza. But I would say that there was one time, there was a comment that I would not even say everyone would think was particularly harsh, but it had a horrible chilling effect on the whole thing. And no other students were willing to ask questions, answer questions. It was done for the semester. So that's the caveat. And actually, in my classes, I never gave credit for it. It was completely optional. And in the class where it worked well, it was incredibly vibrant and used.
So on that, sorry.
Go ahead.
On that topic of the chilling effect, I've definitely have had that happen before. And what I have been doing since is if I have a student that is displaying like a really bad misconception in the discussion and like thinking that they're correct about it, I will message them privately and try to probe their knowledge. And then try to explain privately, this is where you're going wrong. And then either ask them if they're okay with me responding to them publicly or delete their incorrect messages. So that's one way to preserve the students', I don't want to say ego, but pride, I guess, and also make sure that you don't have incorrect information propagating to other students.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Yvonne, were you going to add something as well?
I was actually wondering if you or Georgia could give examples of comments that had a chilling effect, or maybe comments that seemed to be more generative. Because you were, because I think one thing I was hearing from what you were saying is that something that you might have thought was kind and maybe would have even worked in person, like somehow had this very chilling effect on this online forum.
Yes, and in this forum, we had multiple instructors monitoring the same Piazza. So we had multiple sections of the same course. So a student might be being responded to by a professor that wasn't their professor. So I think there's that other piece of it, which is you get used to the tone of your own professor, but you may not be used to the tone of another professor, right? And so the way one professor might joke around might seem very harsh to someone else's student. In this case, I think it was the chilling comment might have been something like, you didn't blank, or you forgot to blank, or, you know, as opposed to maybe something like, it's going to be important to think about blah, you know, how might this change your answer? Can you hear my dog? The mail is here and it must be stopped. Yeah, Georgia, can you think of some examples of that?
It's just, I'm trying to think of like a specific example, but it's always something that is just like, oh, did you remember to, I don't know, factor this term or something like that? And it's just, it depends on the personality of the students in the class. Some people will take any correction publicly as an injury. So that's why I take it to the private conversation and get their permission to respond to them publicly. Some are just fine with it. Some are like, oh, I'd rather retract my statement, and just encourage them to keep posting in the future.
And it may even be something that you set up as a norm ahead of time with the students in your class, right? It may be something to talk about, like, let's talk about what it's going to be like when, you know, when someone posts something incorrect, and it could be student to student as well, because again, they can respond to each other. So I think it's important not just to talk about how as a professor you might respond, but also how the students respond to each other. And then what do you want to do if something's incorrect, right? What's the point of this, is, and how should we all treat each other? But I don't think it's easy. I think all learning environments have their challenges, and for me, with the Piazza, this was definitely one of them. I really like George's idea of having that private conversation.
That being said, I teach classes that are 20 people. As an instructor in a 100-person class, you may need TA support to have that much one-on-one interaction with your students.
All right, we're at 10 to 4. I'm on the 50-minute, teaching. If it's 50 minutes, you're done, kind of. Time to say goodbye. Are there any last comments anybody wants to make?
I'm just going to quickly summarize, I think, what I heard, if that's okay to take up these. So I think one point worth emphasizing is that online courses can look very different. They might have text only, they might have audio, they might have video, and they could be synchronous or asynchronous. We just went over, thanks to Georgia, we just went over some logistics for how to conduct an asynchronous class. And then we spent a lot of time on how to conduct a synchronous class. Some ideas included, maybe flipping the classroom, using Zoom, using chats. And we also talked about logistics, such as, you want to make sure that you know how to use the software before, conducting a class with this. Other logistics that came up were how to show diagrams or drawings or writing in real time. And for this, the suggestions mostly seem to be app-based, with a DIY of pointing a webcam at a paper that you write on. Something else that came up was exams and academic integrity, and I think there were different viewpoints on this, but mostly they centered on how you're going to deal with the question of what kind of deception are you trying to prevent, and a recognition that it is actually impossible to stop all cheating at all times. And so what kind of compromises are you willing to, might you need to make, or might you have to accept, especially on such a short notice? And how might how might your decisions differ based on what kind of who your students are, and what experiences you've had with that, with either those students already or similar courses in the past. We talked very briefly about accessibility options, which mostly focused on captioning software, and there were suggestions of both free software as well as paid software, and then a questionnaire for students that Annalisa Cronell wrote. And then some unsolved questions, maybe we can call them, are things like, how do we do assessment at scale? How do we keep students engaged when we're all behind screens? And what to do about tutoring centers.
Fabulous. I would add to the accessibility, the lighting issue, and sort of the amount of distractedness behind you. And maybe also the executive function suggestions that Georgia had about how to help students with some of that. Any other additions to that amazing summary, Benjamin?
I would, just say that one of the things that I've been ever since we first went on spring break early a couple days ago, and this specter of going virtual has been looming, I've been really worrying about the assessment stuff. I felt like today was really, really helpful. And I just think that there definitely is going to be a place for continued discussion about it, about that balance between giving students a chance to show their knowledge versus academic integrity concerns. And I don't think there's a good answer. I don't know if there's an easy answer, but it's something that I think is going to continue to be an issue for a lot of us.
Lauren?
I think an element for me, and maybe for some of us, depending on parts of what part of the career we're in, is making sure that we're just kind of on the same page as the rest of our departments. with regards to that as well, as like I'm wrapping up a visiting position, and so, you know, I'm leaving behind what I'm leaving behind, and so making sure that I'm on the same page in terms of what is getting by versus what the students have moving forwards. Being on the same page as the rest of the department is kind of the more important thing when it comes to assessment, I think, for me right now.
That's great. And we've been doing some work with the Progress Through Calculus group that's shown some significant ways that course coordination promotes equity, because students can help each other the more that things are coordinated. So another thing to think about is that the more your department does things the same way, the more your students will be able to help each other do those things or stay on track with those things. So I think that's a whole other piece of things. A lot of us teach because we like the freedom, you know, that we have to do things our own way, but sometimes that may not be the best for students. Any other thoughts? Yvonne, thank you especially for taking on the second hour facilitation and summary role. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for staying. Thanks for everybody who shared their wisdom. And I didn't really hear anything. I would love people, my email is rlev as in Victor Y @maa.org. And if you have thoughts about how much I should be doing this, it would be really helpful to know, because from where I'm sitting, this seems like one of the most important things I could be doing right now. And from the number of people that on very short notice with very little publicity, this is sort of one Facebook post and one Twitter post, brought 100 people to the room. I think it may be a real important function of those of us at professional societies that aren't having to create our own courses right now, just to be helping others do what they need to do. But just let me know. And please be critical. Please let me know if, you know, if it's not helpful without having more of a planned expert in the room. I guess my feeling after doing this twice is it would be helpful maybe to have, out of the 50 minutes, maybe have 10 minutes be prepared presentation from one person who knows how to do one thing, and then maybe the rest of it would be more open forum. And maybe as I start learning where the pain points are, we could start having these that are focused on a particular topic. Like today we're going to talk about equity, and today we're going to talk about whatever. But just let me know. And if you would like to be a co-host for one of these, just let me know too, because I'm not going to be able to do these by myself. All right, 3:57, you're out on time. Take care, everybody.